At first glance, Paul Bernado and Karla Homolka seemed like the perfect all-Canadian couple. Paul was charming and handsome with a great career ahead of him, and Karla, a young, blonde-haired, blue-eyed beauty. The two had an instant connection and their relationship flourished from the get-go. But friends, family, and in fact the whole nation were shocked and mortified when the disturbing secrets of this couple were revealed. They went from being a match made in heaven to the most notorious killer couple in Canadian history. This story really goes to show that beauty really is only skin deep. This is the story of the Ken and Barbie killers. Hey guys, I'm Natasha Diamond and this is my new, series, The Final Feast Holiday Horrors. Now, true crime addicts out there may have already noticed that this is not a death row case, and that's because I won't be making a death row meal today. Holiday Horrors is more like bonus episodes in between my usual content, where I will post murder mysteries and true crime episodes that are associated with particular holidays like, Christmas, Halloween, Valentine's Day, and I'll be making food associated with that holiday. So I did want to start off with Halloween. Of course, that's the obvious choice. It's very fitting to my genre. But with all the hype of the Barbie movie, it kind of got me looking at the Ken and Barbie killers in more detail and wanting to share that. I know that sounds like really dark, like, oh, you've watched this positive, uplifting movie and then you're wanting to share some brutal murder with everyone. But if it makes it any better, I did also want to try the trending Barbie food and also try some recipes of my own. So I'm making the famous Barbie pasta, Barbie cake pops, Barbie cocktail, and pink pancakes. If you know me, then I'm obsessed with all things pink and Barbie, so I just couldn't pass up on this opportunity. So with that, let's jump into the case. Let's turn up the heat on the Ken and Barbie killers. Karla Leanne Homolka was born on the 4th of May 1970 in Port Credit, Ontario, Canada. She was one of the oldest of 3 sisters and lived in a stable home with both parents. Her father, Karol, was a Czechoslovakian immigrant and travelling salesman, and her mother, Dorothy, was an administrative assistant at St. Catherine's Hospital. The family were well liked and respected in their small town. Growing up, Karla was described as pretty, smart and well adjusted, with long blonde hair and bright blue eyes. She loved animals and was naturally bright and popular with her friends and the local boys. Karla was never short of dates. As she got older, like many teenagers do, Karla went through a rebellious stage. For some adolescents, this could involve smoking, drinking or sneaking out of the house at night, but for Karla, she went through a much darker phase. She began wearing black and became fascinated with death, the occult and Ouija boards. This change of behaviour struck friends as odd, and one friend in particular became freaked out following the death of Karla's pet. The pet was buried in her back garden, but Karla kept vocalising her desire to dig up its dead body and have a look at it. Reluctantly, Karla's friend eventually agreed, and the two dug up the dead animal. After high school, her love of animals led Karla to get a job at a veterinary clinic. This eventually led her to attend the pet store conference in a hotel in Toronto. While 17-year-old Karla enjoyed a drink at the hotel bar, she was approached by a tall, handsome man who introduced himself as Paul Bernado. Sparks instantly flew between the pair, and it was clear to onlookers that they shared a magnetic connection. Paul was a 23-year-old trainee accountant in a sharp suit, driving a nice car. He was everything Karla had dreamed of growing up. The 5-year age gap posed as no obstacle, and the two spent the evening talking and laughing non-stop. Before we continue with the story of Paul and Karla's romance, let's dive a little deeper into Paul's upbringing. Paul Kenneth Bernado was born on the 27th of August 1964 in Scarborough, Toronto, Canada. He was the third child to parents Kenneth and Marilyn Bernado. From the outside looking in, the Bernados appeared to be a happy, well-off, middle-class family, but behind the scenes, things were far from perfect. Paul's father, Kenneth, began sexually abusing his oldest sister, Deborah, eventually being arrested for his crimes involving voyeurism and paedophilia. This, of course, hindered Paul from having a healthy relationship with his father, whom he hated, and his relationship with his mother was no different. Kenneth and Marilyn's relationship was in turmoil, and although they stayed together, they slept in separate rooms, and Marilyn suffered with depression and agoraphobia. Regardless of his dysfunctional family, Paul appeared to be a well-adjusted, confident child. He was fairly athletic, taking part in sports such as karate, and became an active member of the Boy Scouts. He was even summer camp counsellor at one point. However, When Paul was 16, things took a turn for the worst when his mother revealed that Kenneth was not his real dad. He was in fact born to an affair. The news of Marilyn's infidelity angered Paul to no end, only exacerbating their already strained relationship. With his resentment only growing, Paul would often refer to his mother as a slob and a whore. She would retaliate, calling him a bastard from hell. Paul was an egotistical, self-assured teenager. He concealed dark and violent fantasies, which over time came to the surface when he was caught on numerous occasions behaving sexually inappropriate towards girls. Paul began spying on kids through windows and got a reputation as a peeping Tom. Some children were even forbidden from playing with him due to the rumours. This being said, Paul was never reprimanded for his behaviour. He was an intelligent lad and went on to successfully complete high school and university, becoming a trainee accountant. During his late teens and early 20s, he used his good looks, charm and confidence to pick up girls in bars, only to later beat and humiliate them. He was abusive and violent in his often short-lived relationships and enjoyed manipulating women. By the time Paul met Karla at that chance encounter at the hotel, it was described as lust at first sight. There was something different about her and he was intrigued to learn more. Unfortunately, she held similar sick fantasies and the two were a match made in hell. Throughout their relationship, Paul and Karla engaged in a rough BDSM sexual lifestyle. Karla would write letters to him saying things such as, "Do what you want to me," and it was clear that she was besotted by him. In 1987, the same year the two lovebirds met, a string of sexual attacks were reported throughout the Scarborough area. The first occurred coincidentally on Karla's birthday, the 4th of May. A number of women reported being followed as they walked home from the bus stop, only to be attacked inside their home. The male predator would attack them from behind so that they couldn't see his face, threaten them to keep silent, and then brutally beat and rape them. Over the next 3 years, multiple attacks were reported to the police. With each attack, the level of violence escalated and the perpetrator began using nearby objects to further sexually assault his victims before stealing their belongings and fleeing the scene. With no leads and DNA analysis still in its infancy, police were no closer to catching this sadistic monster. They were worried that his confidence was growing with each attack and the increase in violence would eventually lead to murder. The public were terrified as stories of this evil villain circulated, with the media dubbing him the Scarborough Rapist. In 1990, police finally got a lead when another victim came forward who this time had been attacked from the front. I'm unsure of whether this was a mistake on the perpetrator's part or if he was just getting cocky, but either way, the young woman was able to create a clear composite sketch with an artist to help identify her attacker. It wasn't long after the image was released to the public that people began identifying this man as no other than 25-year-old Paul Bernardo. It was in November of 1990 that Paul made his way down to the police station to be interviewed over these accusations. To officers, Paul seemed cool, calm and confident. He was good-looking, well-groomed and looked sharp in his suit and tie, not your typical low-life criminal. Of course, Paul denied all accusations. He spoke about how he was in a long-term loving relationship with Karla and had never had any problems with previous girlfriends. With no concrete evidence and no previous convictions to show a violent history, police really had nothing else to go on. Paul was only one of 700 people of interest and was able to walk free. However, before leaving the police station, he did consent to have his DNA connected, but as I stated previously, DNA was in its infancy, and with hundreds of other DNA samples waiting to be analysed, Paul's DNA ended up sitting on a shelf in a lab for nearly 2 years before being tested. The Scarborough Rapist would run rampant in the Scarborough area for nearly 5 years, attacking at least 19 women aged 15 to 21 years old. Going back to the year 1990, Paul and Karla had been dating for 3 years when they decided to get engaged. The two spent a lot of time at Karla's home and Paul was welcomed into the family with open arms. He was particularly close with one of Karla's younger sisters, 15-year-old Tammy, who looked to Paul as an older brother. However, his intentions were a lot more sinister. Paul had always had an obsession with virgins and began spying on Tammy, fantasizing about attacking her and taking her virginity. Unfortunately, Karla shared similar sick and sadistic fantasies, so when Paul began pressurizing her into letting him take Tammy's virginity, she literally gifted it to him as a Christmas present. Karla began stealing anaesthetic from the vet's clinic where she worked. Then the two bided their time until the perfect opportunity to assault Tammy arose. It was on the 29th of December 1990 that their sick plan was put into action. After a lovely family gathering, once Karla's parents and other sister had gone upstairs to bed, Karla and Paul encouraged Tammy to stay up drinking with them. They plied her with alcohol whilst lacing her with drugs before Paul brutally attacked this poor child. Unremorseful, Karla even pulled out a camcorder and began recording the whole thing before joining in with the sexual assault, engaging in a threesome. Following this horrific attack, poor Tammy began vomiting profusely. The drug and alcohol mix was too much for the child to bear. She began choking on her own vomit and turning blue before eventually suffocating to death. Paul and Karla quickly came up with a cover story before calling the emergency services, and the death was deemed an accident. As her family grieved this tragedy, Karla and Paul played along, pretending they were just as devastated, using crocodile tears to mask their pleasure. They were due to be married the following summer, and as the weeks passed, Karla grew frustrated with how long her parents were taking to mourn their daughter. She wanted the focus back on her and began insisting that the wedding still go ahead as planned. By this time, Karla and Paul had moved into their rented accommodation in St. Catherine's together. In the midst of their wedding planning, Paul shared with his soon-to-be bride his latest fantasy, as if the last one wasn't bad enough. He expressed to Karla that he'd not only like to rape his next victim, but hold her as a sex slave so that he could do with her as he pleased, whenever he pleased. Only 2 weeks before their big day, on June 15th, Paul went out looking for his next victim. He eventually stumbled across a 14-year-old girl named Leslie Mahaffey, out alone at night. Leslie lived with her mum and stepdad in Burlington, Ontario. She was described as a sweet, kind-hearted and generous girl who had her whole life ahead of her. That evening, Leslie had been out with friends as they were mourning the death of another friend who had recently passed away. Her mother had warned her not to be back past curfew as she would be locked out of the house. Unfortunately, Leslie did arrive late and came home to find her front door locked. She didn't have a spare key and would usually ring the doorbell to alert her family that she was home. On this occasion, for unknown reasons, Leslie refrained, leaving herself open to the predator that was lurking in the shadows. Paul spotted 14-year-old Leslie and somehow managed to befriend her and persuade her to come back with him to his home that he shared with Karla. At this point, Karla was asleep in bed and unaware that Paul had been out on the prowl. He invited Leslie into their home and poured her a glass of alcohol. He then woke Karla up to show her that he had, by all accounts, kidnapped a child, and her initial reaction was not anger or fear of what was about to come, but frustration. Frustration that the alcohol Paul had supplied to this underage girl was served in their expensive champagne flutes from France, which were meant for their wedding. Regardless, Karla pulled out a camcorder once again and began filming Paul's sexual attack on Leslie. To help him maintain his erection, he would force Leslie to say degrading and humiliating things to him, before strangling her and leaving her lifeless body in his basement. The following day, the couple acted their normal cheerful selves as they hosted a dinner party for Karla's parents. All the while, Leslie's body lay cold and still in the basement. Later, Paul went to the store to purchase cement. He set up a tent in the basement to contain the blood splatter and reduce noise before dismembering the body with a power saw. He encased each of the body parts in concrete blocks and dumped them in Lake Gibson in Ontario. Leslie Mahaffey's parents reported her missing as soon as they realised that their daughter hadn't returned home. 2 weeks later, on the 29th of June 1991, Karla and Paul became Mr. and Mrs. Bernado. Karla absolutely loved Disney and wanted a fairy tale wedding fit for a Disney princess, and that's exactly what she got. She pulled into the venue on a horse and carriage before bounding down the aisle in a beautiful floaty white gown. The ceremony was a lavish and joyous occasion shared with all of their closest friends and family. Unbeknown to them, only a few miles away, a deep dark secret would be rising to the surface. As the two were reciting their vows, a fisherman on Lake Gibson was making a horrifying discovery as parts of Leslie's body were breaking free from the cement blocks and floating to the surface. Police were called and investigators determined that they were on the hunt for a psychopath, possibly a serial killer. With no evidence currently linking the couple to Leslie's tragic murder, Paul and Karla were able to travel to Hawaii on their honeymoon. It was only on their return home that they were informed of the news that the body of Leslie Mahaffey had been found and identified. Karla would claim that Paul had beat her severely during their honeymoon and throughout their relationship, although at this point she chose not to report her injuries to law enforcement. Following what he saw as a success in the murder of Leslie, Paul decided he was ready to capture another victim, and this time Karla would help him. Kristen French was a beautiful, kind and caring 15-year-old girl from a happy home. She was involved in sports at school and had a great sense of humour. After learning of Leslie's death, Kristen was always looking out for her peers, reminding them to stay safe and avoid talking to strangers. On the 16th of April 1992, Kristen was walking home from school alone. As she passed the church down a quiet street, she noticed a woman with a map. The woman appeared to be lost and approached Kristen for directions. Being the kind person Kristen was, she was happy to help. However, before Kristen knew what was happening, the woman grabbed her around the waist and a man came up behind her and smuggled her into the back seat of his car. This was of course Paul and Karla. They drove Kristen to their home, where they kept her for 3 days of torture, videotaping each brutal assault. When Kristen found herself alone with Karla, she would plead with her to help her and let her go. Unfortunately, this was to no avail. It seemed like Karla was as much a willing participant as Paul. After 3 days, Paul strangled Kristen to death. Then he and Karla bathed her, chopped off her hair and dumped her naked body in a ditch beside the road in Burlington. Kristen French's body was discovered nearly 2 weeks later on the 30th of April. By 1993, the couple's tumultuous relationship came to a head following one of Paul's volatile mood swings. During an argument in the January of that year, he had severely beaten Karla with a flashlight, leaving her battered and bruised with 2 black eyes. Eventually, she left him, moved in with her relatives and reported the assault with the police, eager to press charges. It was around this time that the Scarborough rapist case began to crack. Remember that DNA that Paul had submitted to the police back in 1990? Well, the results finally came back and he was a match. He was immediately put under 24-hour surveillance and Karla was questioned in regards to the multiple rapes and murders. Initially, she remained more focused on her own injuries and the abuse that she had sustained by the hands of Paul, denying any involvement. However, Karla would later admit to relatives that she was aware of all the crimes that Paul had committed, but claimed that she was an unwilling accomplice, following Paul's orders only through fear. During police interviews, Karla would speak quietly in a gentle, childlike voice. She would dress in schoolgirl-style clothing, which I can only guess was to appear naive and innocent. In February 1993, Paul Bernado was finally arrested, but he refused to talk. Eventually, he confessed to the multiple sexual assaults which had occurred over the span of 5 years, but blamed the murders on Karla. With little hard evidence against Paul to solidify a guilty verdict, Karla agreed to a plea deal. This meant that she would testify against her husband in court and plead guilty to 2 counts of manslaughter in exchange for a 12-year prison sentence. In an attempt to destroy Paul's credibility further, Karla unintentionally implicated herself further by mentioning the home videotapes she'd taken of the attacks. During the 71-day search of the Bernado home, police failed to unearth these tapes, which showed the rapes of Mortified, French, Tammy Homolka and at least one other girl. Unbeknown to them, Paul's lawyer, Ken later gained access to the home and obtained the tapes from above a ceiling light fixture in the upstairs bathroom. He went on to keep these in his possession for 16 months before handing them in. Over a year before the police even got their hands on these videotapes, in June of 1993, Karla's trial began. As agreed, she was sentenced to only 12 years behind bars. When the videos were finally discovered, prior to Paul's trial, they show Karla in a whole different light. Karla was clearly heavily involved in the recordings. The cassette tapes were each labelled in Karla's handwriting, with words like Kristen, Leslie, Paul and me. Some were even decorated with stickers of pretty hearts and flowers. She not only spent time filming each crime, but also participated in the rapes and torture, which she seemed to be enjoying. After Tammy's death, one recording even showed Karla mimicking her late sister, dressing in her clothes and attempting to entice Paul, showing no remorse. During Paul's trial, his defence spoke about Paul's unhealthy mental state since his troubled childhood. They argued that he had never killed before meeting Karla. In September 1995, Paul Bernado was found guilty of all 9 charges against him, including 2 counts of first-degree murder for killing Leslie Mahaffey and Kristen French, and the manslaughter of Tammy Homolka. He was sentenced to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole in 25 years. Later, he was declared a dangerous offender. This means that he is likely to remain in prison for the rest of his life to protect the public. Poor Bernado remains in prison to this day. Karla Homolka, however, was released in 2005 after serving her full 12-year sentence. She changed her name to Leantil and moved state, where she remarried and had 3 children. In my opinion, the two fed off each other's sick fantasies and are as bad as each other. Poor Bernado got what he deserved, a life behind bars, but Karla got off lightly. Why should she be able to live a pretty normal life, start a family and run away from her past? Granted, she had already agreed upon a plea deal before the tapes were recovered, but to be involved in the rape and manslaughter of her own sister, to me, should have sustained a life sentence on its own. What do you think about this case? Do you think Karla got what she deserved? If you've made it this far, then thank you so much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you decide to make any of the recipes that I've done today, then please let me know in the comments so that I can hear how it went. If you've got any other feedback or anything to say about what I've done here, then I'd love to hear it in the comment section, because I'm always looking to improve. I'm very new to YouTube, and yeah, I'm just constantly learning, so any feedback is greatly received, but please try and be nice, even if it is constructive. And don't forget to leave a thumbs up and subscribe so that you can hear more from me. So yeah, until next time, enjoy every meal as if it was your last.